Daniel gripped the urn as if letting go would scatter his memories into dust. His suitcase scraped the steps of the old house, once a home, now heavy with silence. At the first dinner, a spoon slipped, ringing against the floor like a strike to his heart. Lily flinched, eyes darting away, and whispered a chilling line, "Don't let Mom lock me in again." Under the porch light burning too early, Daniel froze. War had already taken so much, but what truth was waiting for him inside his own house? Midday in the desert. The sky was pale blue, almost white, flat and without a single cloud. The sun hammered down on every grain of dust, making the whole air quiver like glass under heat. The guard post Daniel stood in wasn't bigger than a shipping container, its steel walls faded, with narrow slits cut for watching outside. The smell of scorched metal, dried sweat baked into his shirt, and fine dust sticking to his mouth hung heavy in the air. His binoculars dangled from his neck, the rims caked with red grit. Wiping them with his sleeve only smeared it worse. He didn't care anymore. Day after day, his eyes had grown used to the sameness: sand, wire fences, and the faint purple ridges of distant mountains. The enemy didn't show itself. The real enemy was the repetition, and the echoes inside his own head. Then, in the thick heat, came the sound of metal boots clanging up the steps outside. Heavy, deliberate, different from the routine shuffles he usually heard. Daniel turned. An officer stood there with a brown envelope. On its face, a red cross stamped bold, the corner angled like a blade. Daniel reached for it, fingers calloused and cracked from grit, and for some reason they trembled as if they'd brushed against an old wound. He didn't open it right away. Habit of a long-serving soldier: steady the heartbeat, lock down the surge in his chest. But his eyes still caught the sharp, cold print across the front. When he finally slid the paper free, the words struck like a knife: "We regret to inform you, car accident, cremated as requested by family." The world froze. Only the whistle of wind through the steel slits remained. Daniel read it again. And again. As if repetition might twist the meaning, loosen its grip. But the words stayed the same, flat, merciless. Not a single wasted line, not even a shaky comma. His wife, Helen, was gone. Just a notice. A handful of sentences, delivered like a statistic. His throat tightened but no sound came. The silence around him thickened, as if even the desert was holding its breath. Outside, the sun still burned, the wind still moved the dunes, but to him it was all swallowed by emptiness. He leaned back against the hot steel wall, pressing the paper so hard it wrinkled in his hands. Memory rushed in: the morning he left home, Helen standing in the doorway, hair tied in haste, their daughter Lily clutching her skirt. A photo in his wallet. His wife's tilted smile, his little girl's eyes staring straight. That image now slammed against the blunt finality of the telegram, leaving nothing but black space in between. Fear spread through him, sharp and undeniable, not fear of ambush, not fear of what waited outside the fence, but fear of this, that he might not survive the weight of this loss. He'd seen friends fall, watched ambushes take men in seconds. But this wasn't the battlefield. This was home. And it made him feel more breakable than ever. His hand shook on the binoculars. His vision blurred. A gust swept dust into his eyes, but he knew it wasn't just sand. He squeezed them shut, breathed hard, forcing himself upright. Inside, an old voice stirred, the drilled-in command of years in uniform: stand tall. Don't fold. Never let your back bend. And he realized, the war never really left. It just lay low, waiting for the right moment to break through every wall he'd built. This telegram wasn't only bad news. It dragged the ghosts of war back with it. The reminder that loss was always near. That no matter how strong he thought he was, he couldn't save everyone, not even the ones he loved most. But in that pause, he drew a long, dry breath. Helen was gone, yes. But Lily was still here. If he collapsed, she'd be left alone. The fear didn't leave him, but something else took shape alongside it: the truth that his strength wasn't in weapons or orders anymore. It was in facing this head-on, even if it tore him apart. Daniel folded the paper, tucked it into his chest pocket, right against the photo of his wife and daughter. Two pieces of paper, one carrying life, one carrying death, pressed together, heating in the sun. He adjusted the strap of his rifle and lifted his head. The sun still sat high, throwing his shadow long across the sand. The wind rose again, its dry whistle cutting across the post. This time, he didn't look away. He let the dust cling to his boots, let the heat sear his neck. Because in the middle of that pain, something steadier stirred. Not comfort, not relief, but resilience. A quiet decision: he would not fold. He would not let war memories, or even this loss, bury the road ahead. In the harshest place, he started to learn how to stand straight, not just for himself, but for the little girl still waiting for him to come home. Night fell quick, like someone yanked a tarp over the sky. The sun slipped off the metal walls, leaving behind a heat that clung like a fever. The generator in the corner yard droned on, its dry rattle running the length of the container row. A low yellow bulb hung from the guard post ceiling, the metal shade blackened with soot, its glow nothing more than a tired circle on a scarred wooden table. Daniel sat down on a steel chair, elbows resting beside a worn notebook. No wall clock. No bell to mark the hour. Just the hiss of sand dragging across the tin, scratching lines into the night that no one could read. He'd just come back from the makeshift office. Narrow hall, flickering fluorescent tubes, a notice pinned crooked to the board, all leaves suspended until further notice. A red stamp pressed hard, ink bleeding at the edges. The clerk barely looked up, gave a nod that meant don't ask. Daniel said nothing. His hand was still damp with sweat when he pushed through the door, the heat outside hitting him like a slap. Now, at the table, he opened the notebook. A blank page, its corner wrinkled from sweat carried across too many days. His pen clicked once, dry. He wrote a single line, slow but firm, like driving a nail into wood: "My daughter no longer has a mother." Period. Nothing more, nothing less. The ink spread, bleeding out like a dark stain pushing against the weak circle of light. He capped the pen, shut the notebook. The movement quick and sharp, like stripping a rifle in bad weather. No tears. If any tried, the heat burned them off before they could fall. His body spoke in other ways, jaw clenched, shoulders tight, neck rigid. His heart thumped fast, then faster, as though it wanted to outrun itself. He listened. The generator's growl. The shredded flag snapping at the pole. Sand scraping across the concrete. Separate sounds, but woven together into a net stretched across the night, leaving no hole for a cry to slip through. On the table lay the telegram, folded in quarters, resting neatly beside his knife. The black letters hadn't changed, no matter how deep the night got. He pressed his palm flat against it, feeling the rough paper under skin. That hand had once dragged men out of firelines, had carried the weight of blood. Now it carried the weight of a few sentences. Memory flared quick, Helen at the door in house shoes, her figure shrinking as he walked away. Lily in the photo in his wallet, hair wild in the wind, holding up a dead leaf like a flag. The images flickered, cut across one another, then disappeared. He didn't fight them. He let them collide and fade. Outside, patrol change. Boots clanged up the steel stairs in steady rhythm. A shadow crossed the slit window, paused, then moved on. Night carried on with its discipline, patterns so fixed they barely needed eyes. Daniel leaned back in his chair, tilted his head, stared up at the bulb. Its yellow light stung his eyes, but he didn't shut them. The clockless night stretched long, unbroken, from dusk into deep hours, no numbers to tie it down. He unzipped his pack. Inside were things that wouldn't mean much to anyone else, but to him they were order itself: an old folded handkerchief, a chipped lighter, a small roll of tape, a family photo. He set the photo in the light. Helen with her tilted smile that never quite reached her eyes. Lily with a grin stretched wide, arms thrown around his neck. Leaves scattered on his shirt from that fall afternoon. From now on, the picture was the original. Everything else was a copycat with loss. He felt it without words, the weight of the past pressed right into that photograph. Wind slammed against the tin again. Once. Twice. 3 times. He caught a rhythm in it, the way he once caught the rhythm of machine gun fire: steady, fast, cold. Fear stretched out, long as a shadow. Not fear of an ambush. Fear of memory itself snapping him in half right here, when home was nothing more than a word on paper. He felt the ghosts at the edge of the light, nights chasing insurgents, roads wired with mines, faces pale under ambulance lamps, all of it whispering without lips. He straightened in the chair, spread his fingers wide on his thighs like he was holding himself to the earth. Training took over. Inhale for 4 counts, hold, exhale for 6. Again. Again. Not to forget. Just to stay upright. He rose. The floor quivered under his boots, a small shake only someone used to listening for would notice. He walked to the narrow window, looked out at the dark. A yard light trembled in the wind, its beam cutting across the sand like a blade. The mountain ridge lay flat and black on the horizon. The night hadn't changed, but he had. Standing there, shoulders loose, back straight. Resolve wasn't something that flared, it built layer by layer, like sand filling the groove of a tire. Back at the table, he pulled out a rag and began cleaning his rifle. The movements were quick, neat, in order: strip, check, wipe, reassemble. Metal clicking soft and dry. It gave the night structure, rebuilt something small in the middle of its looseness. He set the rifle down, adjusted the strap to its usual spot. At least one thing sat where it belonged. He opened the notebook again. A new page. No words about death this time. Just 3 lines, block letters: keep breath. Keep watch. Keep photo on chest. Beside them, a square he ticked off. A small ritual, a tie for the mind. He slid the notebook into his inner pocket, tapped it like a man touching a charm. How long had passed? Nobody knew. The generator still growled. The sand still scratched. The bulb still glowed dull yellow. Time felt stripped of its hands, its face. The night stretched like a march, not counted in miles but in the number of times he pressed his palm to his chest, feeling the telegram folded there. Each touch was proof, not a dream. And still breathing. A heavy gust shoved sand through the slit. He shut his eyes, leaned his head, let it wash over like a shallow wave. When he opened them, a thin coat of dust had settled on the table corner. He brushed it off in one firm swipe, leaving a clean line through the powder. That simple mark opened a thought: maybe things would be cleared the same way, not all at once, not fast, but one straight pass at a time. Not a promise, but steady. He bent, picked grains of sand from the carved letters in the tabletop. A habit with no meaning but calm. The wind eased. The generator's hum split, then smoothed, like a big animal restless in its sleep. Outside, another patrol changed. Boots again. Then silence. No one stepped in. The circle of light held. And in the middle of it, he understood, the fear was still there, unchanged. But something else now stood beside it, a patient silence. Not the silence of surrender, but of a man tightening his straps before moving on. Toward dawn. The edge of the sky lightened a shade. No blaze of red, just black to gray, gray to ash. The yard light's shadow shrank a little. Daniel stood, his knee knocking the chair with a small, solid sound. He slung his rifle, checked the safety, tucked the notebook away, slid the photo into his chest pocket, laid his hand once more over both the picture and the telegram together. Then he opened the door. Morning wind came cooler, cleaner. Less burn of metal, less sting of sand. He stepped onto the iron steps, looked over the rail. The sun wasn't up yet, but light was enough to show tire tracks looping across the lot, as if someone had turned back during the night. He didn't. He walked straight, boots striking iron in rhythm. Ahead, the narrow hallway opened into new light. Inside, a new beat took hold, steady, firm, neither rushed nor slow. The beat of a man who'd decided to move through fear, not around it. The clockless night finally gave way to morning, without a bell, without a call. Some mornings come like that, not with color, not with glory, but by carrying a soldier clean through a dark tunnel to remind him his legs still work. And at the far end, what he carried wasn't promise, wasn't hope. It was a silent vow, to go home. Not to reclaim what was gone, but to take a child's hand and teach her to stand tall in his shadow. The station sat small, tucked between warehouses, a strip of sunburned grass on one side and a peeling brick wall on the other. The metal sign above swayed in the wind like it was too tired to hold steady. The tracks ran out straight, dull with grease, then blurred into the far edge of town. Noon was sharp and unforgiving. The sun poured down like it had been dumped from a steel bucket, splashing across the roofline and breaking into hot sparks on the concrete. Daniel stood there, hand on the worn handle of his suitcase, the metal urn set at his feet, its dull shine sitting in the thin shade. He shifted his body so his shadow covered it, too private a thing to leave exposed to midday eyes. The old speaker crackled. A flat female voice rattled off station names that sounded more like long strings of letters than places you'd ever want to see. The train rolled into sight, dusty silver, its cars swaying a little, like an old animal carrying too much weight. The doors opened, the steps lowered with a thud. People got on, people got off, shoulders brushing past, plastic bags full of bread, a wilted bunch of chrysanthemums. Everyone had someplace urgent to be, and that rush only made the platform feel quieter. Daniel lifted the urn first, set it in the storage rack low under his seat, then slid the suitcase in beside it. He didn't put the urn overhead. Down at his knees, it carried its own kind of weight, something you couldn't measure, but you felt it. He sat straight-backed, hands locked together, eyes fixed on the window. The glass held a fine layer of grit, and when the train pulled out, the dust curled into thin lines that followed the rhythm of the wheels. The town left in piece by piece. A cobbler's shop with a crooked open sign. A laundry with white bags pressed against the glass, each holding the smell of trapped soap. A basketball court cracked and empty, paint lines faded. A frayed flag on the elementary school pole, hitting once in the breeze then giving up. They passed by like old acquaintances pretending not to see him. Inside, the air carried the rubber tang of plastic seats mixed with stale coffee. A man snapped his newspaper, the sound dry as leaves. A child coughed up front, then went silent. An old woman dozed, chin sunk into her scarf though the heat pressed in. Daniel touched his chest pocket. The photo was still there, damp with sweat on the back. Folded under it, the telegram. 2 slips of paper breathing the same air, past and present pressed together. The train slid into open land. Low brush, sagging fence wire, tilting posts. Cornfields cut down to stubble, the stalks sharp as arrows pointing back at the sky. Shallow ponds reflected the glare, their surfaces rubbed by the wind into thin wrinkles. A stalled truck sat off to the side, hood open, the driver bent over. Behind him, a herd of cattle stared without interest. The whole world moved like a silent film without a soundtrack. The wheels sang against the track in even strokes, not fast, not slow. He caught himself counting them, 4 beats in to breathe, 6 beats out. His chest settled. Somewhere inside, the old fear still crouched, wide awake. But it gave him space when he made himself hold the rhythm. Not escaping it. Taking it along, so it wouldn't come tearing back at him later. At a small stop, the doors opened and hot air rushed in, smelling of fuel. The train paused 3 minutes. Daniel stayed in his seat. He watched a tiny platform, soda bottles sweating under a tin roof, a crooked sign pinned with rusted nails, a half-moon stain on the wood. 2 kids ran through the dust, ice cream dripping down their arms. Their mother didn't call them back. A yellow dog lay under a cart, tongue out, not from effort, just from boredom. When the train started again, Daniel looked down at his boots. Desert dust filled the treads, red grit catching the light. He scraped them against the seat frame, dust falling in a thin line. His mind wandered to a porch back home, wood scuffed from furniture dragged over it, the swing that creaked with every breeze. He couldn't picture what words he'd use, or what moves he'd make. But he could hear it already, the keys on the counter, the slow click of the front door, the floorboards groaning under one more body returned. The train dipped into a tunnel. Darkness swallowed the light, throwing his reflection back at him in the glass, darker skin, deep-set eyes, blood vessels thin as dried rivers across the whites. When the train burst out again, his face stayed there faintly, floating over the white glare outside. He didn't look away. Sometimes you had to look your own shadow dead on, just to know you still existed. At a transfer hub, he switched trains. The hall hummed blue with vending machines. He dropped a few coins, picked up a bottle of water. Cold plastic, beads of condensation along the side. On the bench, he unscrewed the cap, drank. The water slid down a raw throat, leaving nothing but a narrow streak of cool. A janitor worked nearby, pushing a mop steady and straight across the tiles, back and forth. Clean to here, clean to there. Watching him, Daniel felt lighter. Even the hardest things got done the same way, line by line. The ride went on. More houses, billboards, backyards strung with clotheslines. A barber pole still spinning red and blue. A parts shop with 4 tires hanging like mute O's. A white church, doors open, inside dark and smelling of wood and old incense. Daniel rested his hand on the urn, cool, smooth, quiet. No words came, and the lack of words brought a strange kind of peace. The city crept up, small blocks first, then taller squares after. Power poles like pencils driven into the sky. Streets filled with brakes, horns, a dog barking against the heat. A hot dog cart smoked on the corner, mustard hanging in the air. A for rent sign taped over with 3 phone numbers, one on top of another. Life lay bare in the details you didn't need to explain. End of the line. Daniel pulled the suitcase down, gathered the urn close. The steps of the platform were worn smooth, like old knees. A yellow cab waited, hood cracked open, sunshade clipped with rust. He slid into the back. Vinyl seats split and taped, the smell of air freshener mixed with sweat and leather. The driver caught his eyes in the mirror, looked away. No questions asked, Daniel had given an address, flat as coordinates. No questions about the urn either. In the city, everyone's got their own load. The cab rolled on, wheels thumping over patchwork asphalt. Trash bins lined the street like a little army. Metal wind chimes clinked lazy on porches, some tangled and mute. A girl walked her dog across the crosswalk, leash tight, animal sniffing the air with purpose. A bike jolted over a pothole, bell ringing a thin metallic note. Daniel leaned his head back, watching the city move past. A diner sign caught his eye. A wide glass window lit warm yellow, red vinyl chairs lined up inside, steel tables catching the glow. He didn't stop, but he marked it, like he always did with safe corners in war. Not for instinct, just habit, keeping track of places you could rest if you had to. The cab rolled past old worker housing, brick walls flaking, rusted swings standing empty. Past a school, new paint brushed over cracks, but the lines still showed like scars. Past a garage where a man's arms disappeared into an engine bay, sunglasses shoved up in his hair. Past a pharmacy with a hand-painted sign for Saturday shots, the is too heavy like the brush slipped. In the mirror, the driver's eyes flicked again. Fuzzy dice hung limp. The radio played soft country roads long, shoes worn thin. Daniel didn't hear the lyrics. He listened to the rhythm of the car, bump steady as a father's hand patting a child's back. Fear sat in his chest, layered. Fear of that first step across the threshold, fear of silence inside, fear of his daughter's eyes aged beyond her years. But even in fear, something thin and steady tugged him forward, not bravery, not glory. Just the old instinct to stand when the horn blew. Red light. The cab stopped. A police cruiser turned the corner, lights flashing once before fading. An old woman passed, clutching a paper bag of bread, slow and careful, as if she could lose the last warmth she carried. Daniel looked at his own hand, knuckles raised, old scratches pale. He set it on the urn. Inside the metal, nothing stirred, but the silence thickened, hardened into something solid enough to lean on. Green light. The cab turned onto a street lined with maples past their season, leaves crisp and thin. Houses stood small porches with lined-up shoes, faded teen banners, leftover holiday lights. A child's bike lay tipped on the grass, while spinning one last turn. The sun softened here, slipping through branches in pale circles. The cab slowed over a speed bump. Daniel knew this road. Every curve, every scar of patched pavement. Gravel whispered under the tires as they pulled into the narrow lane. Ahead, the porch came into view, still and waiting. The car stopped. Engine ticked once, then went quiet. The driver killed the radio, glanced back. Daniel nodded, paid. The receipt flicked in the wind before dropping flat. Door shut. The cab turned away and was gone. It was just him now. The gravel, the porch, his shadow stretching up the walk. He lifted the urn close to his chest, holding it against his heart, where the photo still rested. The suitcase rolled, wheels scratching on stone. His hand brushed the fence post, hot wood under his palm, steady with the warmth of home. On the porch mat, the word welcome had worn down to welcome, like a greeting that hadn't finished. He stopped at the first step. A sparrow hopped on the rail, stared, then flew. The house was silent. No radio, no clatter of dishes, no footsteps. Just a silence he'd been hearing all along, carried with him from train to cab to here. Daniel set the suitcase by the post, straightened his shoulders, laid his hand flat on his chest like adjusting an invisible medal. He took one long breath. It felt like the moment before a charge, his body convinced it knew what was next. But there was no charge here. No map, no target. Just a door, the same lock, the same worn knob. He raised his hand. Didn't knock yet. Let it hover, measuring the thickness of silence. The other hand tightened the urn against his chest. Breath came out long, stripped of train and cab, left with heat of wood and grit of gravel. His fingertips brushed the door, and something inside brushed back, maybe a step, maybe a board shifting in the sun. He straightened. Chin lowered just enough, the way he always did when few words would have to carry a lot. The whole journey collapsed into this moment, caught between porch and inside, between road and living room, between noise and the breath of home. He knocked. 3 times. Not loud, not soft. Even, like the wheels that carried him here. And as his hand left the wood, he knew the silent trip home was over. What waited now would no longer be silence. It would be the sound of a door opening, skin on skin, and a distance that could only be closed by embraces long enough to soften again. The door opened like a tired eyelid. The hinge let out the faintest breath, more a sigh held inside the wood than a groan. Janet stood in the frame, hands laced together to stop the shaking, her knuckles sharp under skin worn thin by too many summers. The light from the porch fell across her cotton blouse, picking out loose threads at the cuff. Behind her stretched a cool dimness, the smell of old soap and reheated soup mixing into a scent of home strong enough to tighten the chest. Lily stood tucked into her grandmother's skirt, head tilted, dark hair hiding part of her cheek. Her eyes slid over the urn Daniel held against his side, then down to his dust-caked shoes, before finally settling on his face like a traveler stopping at an unfamiliar sign. Janet shifted her arms just enough, as if to say come in without speaking. Daniel gave a short nod, lowered the urn to his chest, and stepped across the threshold. Inside, the air was cooler, softer. The smell of soap hung stronger, one of those square bars worn down smooth like a pebble, sitting in a chipped dish by the sink. On the stove, a small pot of soup sat tilted under its lid, steam dripping into beads that slid down and disappeared at the rim. Celery, onion, a trace of black pepper. The table by the window was already set, 2 white bowls with spoons lined straight, napkins folded beneath them, neat enough to feel like a ritual. A third bowl sat empty, no spoon. Daniel leaned the suitcase against the wall, the urn still cold against his chest, its chill pressing through his shirt. He bent low. Lily stepped out from Janet's side and fell into his arms. She was still light, like when she was younger, but her shoulders held stiff, her hands never rising to his neck. Her hair brushed his chin, clean with the smell of kids' shampoo, there and gone like a wave scared of sand. He held her just enough. No squeeze, no soothing words. Her small shoulders felt like a green branch in the first wind, able to hold, but not convinced yet. Janet watched, then turned, moving into the kitchen with the sound of sandals dragging soft across the floorboards, footsteps made from years of crossing the same space. Daniel let Lily go, his palm pausing at the back of her neck for one warm second before lifting away. She stepped back, eyes dropped to her shoes, her thumb rubbing the hem of her dress, an old reflex for steadying herself. The door shut behind them, the latch clicking into metal. Lily flinched, muscles down her arm tightening like a bird startled. Daniel tilted his head, marking that flinch somewhere deep, not judging, just storing it. He looked around. The mantel had room between two frames, one of a winter beach, the other of a country road under fallen leaves. He didn't place the urn there. Instead, he set it on a low wooden cabinet, pushing it back close to the wall, like putting something permanent in a temporary rest. He stood still, eyes tracing the old things waiting in the room, a hand-knit blanket folded on a chair, the wall clock ticking smooth without sound, fridge magnets holding scraps of paper, doctor's appointments, water bills, an old recipe brown with age. Sunlight cut a rectangle across the rug, dust drifting through it slow as snow that refused to fall. Janet came back with a damp towel, stopped at the stove to lower the flame, lifted the lid so the soup wouldn't boil over. She looked at the pot a second longer than needed, as if seeing more than soup, then turned to straighten the spoon beside a bowl. Daniel stepped to the sink, opened the faucet. The first stream warm, then cooling. He worked the soap down to bubbles thin but slick, the smell pulling him back to mornings when nothing had yet gone wrong. He scrubbed the cracked skin of his knuckles, water sliding thin between his fingers, carrying dust away, leaving behind a raw clean sting. Lily stood in the doorway, caught between rug and tile, like she hadn't chosen which ground to stand on. Her eyes drifted to the porch swing outside, now still as a question. Then she watched her father's hands under the water, watching the soap form and fade, watching repetition like it mattered. Janet placed the towel down, her wrist turned just so, showing faint traces of age, like a map of what she'd carried through. Daniel shut off the water, dried carefully. Pressing the towel to each knuckle, folding it back neat. Each movement said its own words, "I'll stay." He walked past the table, his hand brushing the back of a chair. Smooth wood, faint varnish, dust, memories without pictures. Janet ladled soup, just half a bowl. She set it down, sat, hands folded on her lap. Lily hovered, eyes fixed on the light pooled on the rug, then edged forward, touched the table edge like she was testing water. Daniel pulled his chair. The legs scraped a quiet line across the floor. He sat straight. The meal was ready, though no one had spoken. The silence made every move stand out sharper. The fridge hummed once then quieted. The soup's steam rose, dampening his wrist. The clock's second hand jumped in small motions that landed hard in the eye. Lily slid her chair out slow, careful not to make noise, though the floor betrayed her with a thin squeak. She sat without leaning back, hands folded in front, eyes avoiding the bowl. Daniel lifted his spoon, waited a breath for the heat to fade, then tasted. Chicken, salt, roots cooked down too long. The taste of home. His throat felt it before his head did. Janet placed her spoon down on the saucer with a small, steady sound. Lily touched her spoon to the rim of her bowl, holding it there like she was clinging to a line she trusted. No talk of weather. No talk of roads traveled. No mention of what rested in the urn on the cabinet. Silence wasn't a wall anymore. It was a blanket, softening edges. Daniel let it cover him, made no move to cut through. He knew in war, some nights all you did was breathe, stay still, and wait. Home was no different, except here the silence smelled of celery. After a few spoonfuls, he set his down, glanced toward the cabinet. Afternoon light slipped through the curtain, ran down the urn, and settled across the floor, stopping at his shoes. He lowered his eyes, felt that line of light mark the space between then and now. Across the table, Janet lifted her bowl, sipped, and held it close an extra moment like a hand she didn't want to let go. Lily blinked twice, lips pressed tight, shoulders dropping just slightly so slight no stranger would notice. The meal ended as it began. Without announcement. Janet gathered bowls, carried them to the sink. Water ran warm, then cool, then warm again, like a story without a clear ending. Daniel stood, slid the suitcase into the living room corner beside the bookcase. He didn't open it. He scanned the shelves, spines curved, a garden manual with a pressed leaf between pages, a frame turned face down. He didn't lift it. Not out of fear, just knowing some things stay in order. In the long quiet, he stepped onto the porch, cracked the door to let the breeze cut through. The wind chimes knocked together, finally giving off a thin glassy sound. He stood in the doorway, between soup and sunlight. Back straight, palm on the frame, warmth passing into wood. The porch swing sat in view. He nudged it gently. It answered with one creak, then stilled enough to tell the house someone was here to stay a while. When he turned back, Lily was at the window, finger tracing shapes in the fogged glass. A small square, a round knob. Then she wiped it away, leaving only a smear like ash. Daniel stopped behind her, close but not touching, letting the space be hers. Janet set a cloth over a chair, tugged the curtain half shut. The house shrank to a bearable warmth. Evening would come, bringing small routines to relearn: when to switch off the porch light, how to cover the pot, where to leave shoes without tripping. Daniel's eyes swept the room once more, ending in a quiet nod to the house, to the two people inside it, to the day done. Resilience didn't arrive like a drumbeat. It came like a thin streak of late sun across the floor, slow, steady, fading past the wall but leaving behind a warmth that lingered longer than the light. He walked to the cabinet, laid his hand on the urn. Just a second. Not calling, not saying goodbye. Only confirming the weight had spread itself to the four corners of the room. Then he pulled back, stood still, hearing his own heartbeat fall in with the drip at the sink, the faint breath of Lily at the window. And in that layered sound, he knew, the silent trip home was over. What remained was to stay. Stay, in slow gestures, in reheated soup, in hands dried without words. Stay, long enough for the first hug to soften. Stay, as long as it took. The meal went on without a word. The soup steam hung over the bowls like a thin layer of fog, fragile enough to break. On the table sat salt, pepper, 2 slices of dry bread, napkins folded square. The wall clock kept its quiet steps, the second hand twitching forward, each pause sharp in the eye like an unfinished sentence. Daniel sat across from Lily. Janet's chair angled slightly away, giving her room to get up and move to the kitchen without brushing against anyone. The afternoon light pulled back off the rug, leaving a cold strip across the edge of the table. Then the spoon slipped. First came the looseness in the hand, like a string snapping. Then the sound, metal striking porcelain, sharp and bright across the wood table, rolling, falling. The hit on the floor wasn't loud, but it was clear, a single ping that carried through the room like a match struck in silence. The echo chased itself into the corners, bounced once, and died. After that, the house dropped still, like an animal holding its breath. Lily curled at the sound, shoulders rising to her ears, back folding, chin near her chest. Her small hands crossed over her stomach, thumbs pressing deep into the edge of her dress. Her eyes dropped, not to the spoon but to the dark under the table. Her feet tucked in, toes pressed back against the chair legs, soles curling, as if to make herself smaller, hidden. Daniel froze mid-reach. His hand was halfway down, an awkward pose if anyone cared to notice, but he held it there. His back stayed straight, his chin set. His eyes didn't drop to the spoon, they lifted. Across the table he met Janet's eyes. Hers slid away, settling on a blank patch of wall, a spot with nothing on it. Her hands pressed together in her lap, thumb digging into the back of the other hand, keeping rhythm with something she couldn't let slip. No one said sorry. No one said it's all right. Words like that would have been too wide, too heavy, like tossing a blanket that smothers the little warmth just built. The house chose silence, and this silence wasn't the same as the porch's. It was thicker, a cloth pulled tight to block the draft, to hold things in. Daniel pressed his back into the chair, slow. He lowered his hand carefully, eyes never leaving Lily. Fingers touched the floor first, then his palm, lifting the spoon soft so the metal never knocked wood again. He held it in his hand for a beat, like cradling a bird you didn't want to startle. Then he set it on his napkin, not handing it back yet. Across from him, Lily's breath found sound again. Short, quick, rising and falling under her shirt. She stared not down, not up, but into the air where the noise had been. Janet stood without a word. She walked to the kitchen, brought back a damp cloth, bent down to wipe the floor. One pass, then another, though there was nothing to clean. Her knuckles showed under thin skin, shaking just a little before steadying. She hung the cloth back, straightened its edge with 2 fingers. She didn't turn back to the table, but Daniel saw the stiffness in her neck, like someone keeping balance on a narrow bridge. The soup cooled, thin rings of fat closing like wilted petals on top. Daniel tapped his own spoon once against the table, a quiet signal. Then he set it down in front of Lily, not over the bowl, but on the napkin, leaving the choice to her. She didn't move. Her shoulders lowered half an inch, and stayed. The whole room waited on that small drop. Daniel turned, reached for the pot, turned the flame down. Steam lifted again, celery and pepper mixing with the dry soap smell from the dish on the sink. He set the lid so it wouldn't hiss. He ladled another scoop into his own bowl, the sound of metal against ceramic softened by the cloth underneath. He counted his breathing, 4 in, 6 out, slowing his body down. Lily pulled her spoon close. Not to eat, just to hold. Then she set it against the rim, handle turned inward, her way of saying she was done. Daniel nodded to himself, took another small spoonful, swallowed quiet. Janet came back, touched her apron pocket, pulled out a pill, then slid it back when she realized it wasn't time. She brushed a gray strand from her forehead. It fell back in place. Time stretched sticky as taffy. The clock carried on, silent. A car passed outside, shadow flicking across the curtain. On the fridge, a scrap note by Milk, which shivered when the compressor kicked on. Daniel stood, not to end the meal but to move. He took a clean small bowl, filled it with soup, set it near Lily's main bowl, a little distance away. Smaller, shallower, easier to face. He didn't push it closer, just left it where her reach could decide. She looked at it, blinked twice slow, and left it be. That was enough. Janet slid a cloth mat under the place where the spoon had dropped. She did it without looking up, but her face softened, like someone remembering how to dull an edge. She sat again, laying a thin piece across her shoulders, fragile but there. The air shifted. No one spoke, but the space between the three of them tilted slightly closer. Daniel poured a bit of water, set it on the table, close, not pressing. He took Lily's fallen spoon, washed it under warm water, dried it, and returned it to the drawer. A way of telling the house, things could be put back safe. In the glass door of the cupboard, their shadows showed 3 shapes, apart, but no longer turned away. After a long pause, Lily lifted the smaller bowl. She didn't use the spoon. Just leaned in, breathed the steam. The warmth touched her nose, made her blink. She set it back, exactly where he'd placed it. Daniel didn't watch her straight. His eyes fixed on a scratch across the table, pale and long. He rubbed his thumb once over it, as if to remind himself even a flawed surface could still hold a meal. The meal ended quiet again. Janet gathered bowls, holding the spoons an extra second in her palm before setting them in the sink, soft enough not to clang. Daniel stood beside her, cushioning each dish with a towel so nothing rang. Every sound had a hand to catch it, none fell alone. When the dishes were done, Janet hung the towel over the stove, its ends even. Lily lingered in the doorway, thumb at her hem, slower now. Her eyes moved from the urn on the cabinet to the window, 2 places apart by one long breath. Daniel followed her gaze, just to know the new paths already taking shape in the room, silent but steady. He wiped the table, pushed the chairs back, not perfect, just a little angled for space. He pulled the notebook from his pocket, opened to the page where desert words still waited. He wrote 3 more, block letters, avoid the fall. Period. The fridge clicked off, the pause afterward felt like convoys halting in his head, peaceful, though the march wasn't done. Night dropped. Daniel flicked the living room light, second try before it held. Yellow glow stretched over the wall, landing on the turned-down frame. He didn't lift it. By the door, his shoes still pointed out, he spun them in, toes toward the house. Small things spoke for him, I'm staying. When it was all set back, he passed Lily, close enough for her to feel but not touch. He stopped just long enough to let her know. She turned, light showing 2 faint red marks on her cheeks, the trace of a long day holding too much in. He didn't stare. He stepped out, let the night air sweep through. The trees outside brushed one another, making the sound of old hands rubbing soft. Later, before bed, Janet placed Lily's spoon, cleaned and dry, into a chipped mug with a faded flower. Tucked away like a small story saved for tomorrow. Daniel saw it, nodded with his eyes though not his head. Lily watched too, shoulders lowering just a notch more. No one called it progress, but everyone knew, from now on, falls would be measured. And if they came, someone's hand would be there to catch, so the sound wouldn't ring sharp, so her heart wouldn't fold like dry leaves. Through the window, night winds slipped in. Daniel shut the kitchen light, left the living room lamp glowing. On the floor, its pale beam stretched from the table to the porch. He stood at the head of that line, hand over his chest, where the telegram and photo rested together. Across the room, the spoon leaned quiet in its cup. The whole house seemed to hear that silence, and somehow it weighed less, like when you know something has already fallen, been picked up, and set where it can't startle anymore. After dinner, the house settled like a pond gone still. The living room lamp was left on low, soft yellow, enough to catch the dust moving slow in the beam. The fridge hummed once, then quieted. Daniel walked the narrow hallway, his hand brushing the wall as if to measure the house's old habits. Outside Lily's room, a small gray rug had been added, its edge unraveling, a loose thread poking out like a weak root. Her desk sat by the window, where the glass held cooler air. The smell of fresh crayons mixed with paper and worn leather. On the desk lay a sheet of paper, bent at the corner like an ear on a folded toy. Daniel leaned closer. A woman drawn with a smudged face, no clear eyes or mouth. A heavy lock scribbled dark. In one corner, a child crouched with arms wrapped around knees. The background rubbed over and over, wax thick and shiny, even torn where the paper gave way. Only a few colors: brown, black, gray, faint yellow. No sky. No open window. Just a dangling bulb throwing a dull patch of light. He didn't touch it right away. He bent lower, tilted his head so the lamp behind him wouldn't glare. The strokes rose like terrain, pressed deep here, shallow there. Along the edge, scratch marks from fingernails. He let out a slow breath. He'd read desert maps before by the feel of sand under his boot. This was another kind of map, the map of silence. He slid his fingers under the page, lifted and set it flat again. The crease eased, the paper whispering like a dry leaf turning on brick. He smoothed the tear, stopping just short of pulling fibers loose. Like placing a hand on someone's back without waking them. A tin box of crayons sat nearby, dented, letters worn off. He opened it, stubs lined up like tenants in a crowded row. Brown short, black ground down, gray nearly gone, yellow peeled, red long but bent at the tip. No blue. Just a gap the size of a pinky where it should have been. He reached under the desk, scraps of paper, pencil caps, a chewed eraser. His hand found a cool piece, a bitten-down blue crayon. He set it on the desk, apart from the others, like someone waiting outside the door. From the kitchen came the steady drip of a faucet, the house's own water clock. Janet walked by, glanced in, paused a beat, then kept moving. Daniel stayed with the drawing. He noticed, the big lock floated without a door to hold. Nothing attached. Just a lock in midair. He didn't let his mind fill in the rest. He only noted it, no door, just the lock. He placed the drawing back, smoothing the crease. Then opened the desk drawer. A stack of paper, edges worn. He pulled one sheet, set it on top of the old drawing, leaving just a corner exposed, like a crack left for air. Beside it, he placed the blue crayon. Not pushed toward her hand, just there. On the shelf he found a pencil sharpener, blade dull but handle polished from use. He shaved 2 pencils down, curls of wood falling in rings, the clean smell of cedar filling his chest. Lily appeared in the doorway, eyes dark as water. She didn't step fully in. One foot pressed into the rug, the other retreated onto wood, like testing which ground would hold. Daniel didn't meet her straight. He looked sideways, the way you look at glass that might break. He shifted just enough so the desk sat fully in her view. The blue crayon in the middle, the blank sheet above, the corner of the old one peeking through. 3 things in line, not touching. She took a breath so soft it sounded like curtain cloth moving. Her thumb rubbed the hem of her shirt. Then she stepped closer, just enough for the smell of wax to reach her nose. Her eyes lingered on the blue, then the blank sheet, then his elbow resting steady. Daniel said nothing. He eased back half a step, arms loose. No invitation, no push. Janet paused in the doorway, tapped her nail twice against the frame without sound. Her eyes skimmed the lock in the drawing, then caught on the torn spot in the paper. She held a dry cloth, but didn't enter. She left the room to its own breathing. Daniel slid the chair back a little, just enough so it wouldn't scrape the rug. Barely a sound. He squared the tin of crayons, lined them neat. The blue still set apart. He nudged the eraser into place. These moves, from a distance, could have looked like a man setting a small post for a tired soldier. He knew what he was doing, restoring order to a rough patch, the way he'd done in places far from home. Lily stepped closer, hand on the desk edge, her skin whitening with pressure. She looked at the tear. Her breathing showed faint in her shirt. She didn't sit, didn't reach. She stood like a guard at the gate of her own mind. Daniel touched his pocket notebook, thumb resting over it like counting heartbeats. He didn't open it. Not everything needed words. Outside, the wind knocked the chimes, thin metal tapping thin metal. Janet's shadow slipped from the frame like water from shore. Daniel kept his shoulders easy, his eyes dropping to a scratch in the desk running parallel to his daughter's nose line. He saw it then, fear didn't always roar. Sometimes it spoke through the small things, a bitten crayon, a torn sheet marking its place. His job was to make room for those things. He set a half-full glass of water near her hand. The glass touched wood soft, like a quiet greeting. She glanced at it, then back to the blue. Her lips pressed shut. Almost without knowing, her finger reached, touched the crayon, pulled back fast as if testing heat. It wasn't hot. Just cool, with an old bite mark. Daniel looked at his boots, sand still clung to the tread. He rubbed one against the other, grains dropping like a few dry raindrops. He opened another drawer. Inside, more sketches, edges curled. One showed the porch steps, the swing shadow drawn too long. Another was all diagonal lines, pressed heavy at one corner. Another was rows of squares, each with a dot inside. He didn't stare. He stacked them neat, slid them back, added a clear sheet on top, so the torn edges wouldn't tear more. Lily sat down. The chair gave a soft squeak, not harsh. Her palms flattened on the desk, steadying herself. Daniel eased back another step, letting the lamp fall fully on her workspace. From there he saw her small neck straight, hairline thin as rows of grass at dusk. She looked at the blank sheet. For a while. Then she pulled it up, covering the old drawing. The blue stayed at her side. She didn't touch it. Daniel kept the camera trained, his left hand tightening around the rubber grip. Through the viewfinder, her face did not shake. She went on. No complaints, no accusations. Just short lines, placed carefully like stepping stones across a stream. Thank you for teaching me it's okay to spill, and okay to wipe it up. Thank you for letting the spoon rest in the cup so it didn't fall alone. Thank you for fixing the porch roof so the wind could pass without screaming through the house. Daniel saw Janet's shoulders tremble once, though she sat straight, eyes fixed ahead, her hands folded calm over her bag. The tendon in her neck rose, then eased. Beside him, a stranger coughed once, then stilled, maybe realizing even that broke the quiet. Lily's voice slowed, paused in the right places, like she'd learned the words not just with memory but with the rhythm of their new days. Thank you for standing outside the bathroom door, counting to 3 with me. Thank you for leaving a piece of blue crayon on the desk, so the sky could come back when I was ready. In Daniel's mind, the desk with the white sheet laid over the old drawing, the stub of blue lying in the light. The porch board was replaced, the photo hung lower, the evening sun laying a warm line across the glass. Crumbs of cookies on the table, the dry towel always waiting at the edge. None of it needed sound, but together they spoke. Lily glanced down once more at the page, then lifted her eyes, no longer to the floor but straight ahead, as if walking down a familiar road. Daniel lowered the camera a little, letting her voice fill the space. The strap pressed warm into his neck. A tear slipped down, hit the record button's rubber edge, then dropped. He didn't wipe it. I want to thank the one who didn't use big words, just did small things. The one who reheated the soup. The one who opened the door so the wind could come through. The one who placed a hand on my back for a moment, then let go so I could stand on my own. The hall was so quiet you could hear the current hum through the speakers. In the front row, a mother bent low over her program as if reading, but her hand crushed the paper edges until they wrinkled. Janet exhaled soft, like letting a tight thread slip out of her chest. The final line came with no flourish, no raise of voice. The one who stayed is my home. I want to grow up like that. Still, no clapping. Daniel heard only the faint vibration of the camcorder in his hands, his own breath making it quiver. A shoe scraped against the floor. Somewhere, the hallway clock ticked past another mark. Then from the far corner, two hands began, slow and soft. Another joined. Applause spread thin as rain over sand, not loud, but steady, layer after layer. A few sniffles were muffled, tissues lifted then tucked away again. Daniel lowered the camera to his lap, the lens still open, pointing into the dim between rows. He left it there, like giving an eye to rest. On stage, Lily bowed, not deep, not hurried. Just enough. When she raised her head, her eyes flicked once toward him. Not long, but long enough. He nodded, small, a nod only the two of them would catch. She took her certificate from the teacher, held it in both hands, and walked off. Shoes firm, dressed them swaying like a pond touched by wind. Daniel lifted the camera again without thinking, catching a few seconds of her back vanishing behind the curtain, then shut it off. His palms sweated warm against his thigh. The applause ebbed like waves pulling off a beach, leaving damp lines behind. Murmurs began, short and scattered. Someone buttoned a jacket, someone folded the program into a pocket. Janet smoothed a strand of hair, then set her hand on his arm for a moment, like laying a stone on new mortar so it could set. The rest of the ceremony blurred into a gentle haze. Other children read their lines, names were called, papers handed out, cameras flashed, light laughter filled the room. Daniel sat back deeper in his chair. Every time his mind drifted, it circled back to one picture, Lily on stage, shoulders steady, voice unshaken, her first words flying straight to the mark. When the chairs scraped back all at once, it sounded like a wave of wood across the hall. Feet tangled, apologies whispered. Daniel waited for the crowd to thin before moving. He didn't rush. He walked in his own slow rhythm, the same pace he'd kept these months, one step firmer than the last, not much, but enough. At the edge of the stage, Lily stood, certificate pressed to her chest, chin resting against the paper for a beat before lifting again. Janet reached first, smoothing her dress. Daniel came after, didn't speak, only touched the corner of the certificate, straightening it between her hands. She looked up, her lips bending in the faintest line, gone as quick as a ripple on water. Enough. The hallway outside was cooler, a breeze slipping through an open window, laying long shadows across the floor. Daniel stood on the steps, the camcorder switched off, looking at a few dry leaves scattered on the square. He drew a deep breath, chalk dust and fresh paper mingling with pale sunlight. Behind him, children's voices called, someone laughed, a door closed softly. All of it folding into a gentle backdrop, closing the day. He knew the walk home wouldn't look the same as the afternoons before. Same sidewalks, same trees, same backseat waiting. But one thing had changed, those words, I want to thank the one who didn't leave, were no longer just lines on paper, no longer just a voice on a crackling mic. They had settled inside his chest, like a flat stone tucked in a pocket, brushing him with every step a reminder to slow down, to stand tall, to stay. Evening slid down slow, like a thin cloth being drawn over the slope. The pavement darkened notch by notch, the raised stones along the sidewalk caught the last orange light, bouncing it against the leather of their shoes. Daniel carried the camcorder, switched off, the strap brushing his collarbone, each step clicking soft where the heel struck the patched asphalt. Wind moved through the rows of bare maples, dry leaves chasing along the grass line. On the lawn, Lily chased a tumbling leaf, her small body leaning forward, hair streaming across her neck, laughter spilling out in bright little bursts you could almost hear sparkle. Janet walked a pace away, clutching her cloth bag close, fingers hooked through the straps as if holding on to words she hadn't spoken. On the gentle incline she paused. Not from weariness, but to let out a deeper breath. Their three shadows stretched across the road, overlapped, then separated as they moved. From a porch up the hill, a wind chime rang, a thin metallic tremor drifting down. She turned her face toward Daniel, not meeting his eyes, just enough to aim her words. Her voice was rough in the breeze. I was afraid, and I stayed silent too long. The last four words dropped like a pebble into a dry creek bed. Daniel didn't answer with speech. He looked down at his shoes, the dust wedged in the rubber grooves catching a faint shine, then raised his eyes, laid his hand on his mother's shoulder. His hand was warm, steady, not pulling, not jerking. Slow enough that you could almost hear the wool of her sweater rub against his palm. Janet's shoulder eased a little, like an old tree steadied by a fresh rope tied around it. The hill carried them past a peeling white fence, past a half-open window where the smell of baking bread drifted, then vanished. Sparrows lined the telephone wire, punctuation marks hung in a row. On the grass, Lily still chased her leaf, kicking at air, her laughter bending in the wind, thinner but clear. Daniel watched, his mouth not smiling, but the lines around his eyes loosening, like the last button of the day finally fastened right. Janet slowed half a step. Back then, she said, still not looking straight, I thought silence would block the wind. Turns out, silence is wind. She gave a tiny laugh, not defensive, just admitting frailty. Daniel pressed her shoulder once more, then let go. He adjusted his stride to match hers. Close enough to touch, far enough for each to keep balance. A dog barked twice from behind a fence across the road, like a short greeting. Lily stopped chasing, stooped for the leaf that had settled. She held it up, tracing the thin veins like a map of some nearby place. She lifted it higher into the late light, let out a small "oh," a sound with no meaning except pure joy. She ran back, slipped the leaf into Janet's hand without a word. Janet pinched it between her fingers as if it were a ticket across a narrow bridge. She didn't hand it back, didn't pocket it, just carried it, letting it flutter with her breath. The slope ended at a turn past a brick house streaked with moss. Daniel thought of his own porch, the new plank he had nailed in place. The air here didn't shriek, it brushed soft against his ears, carrying damp earth and the faint scent of old paint from the fences. His steps fell in rhythm, 4 counts in, 6 counts out, like his body had learned the hills of this town. Tomorrow, Janet said, I want to try making the soup different. Less celery, more carrots. Her tone carried a hint of asking permission, mostly the wish to mend something without naming it. Daniel gave a small nod, nothing more. He knew that soup would be different, like the hinge replaced, like the photo hung lower, changed just enough for the house to feel itself shifting. Lily darted ahead, then turned, walking backward for a stretch, trying to keep her shadow line with theirs. The three shadows touched along the grass edge, then split when she drifted too far and nearly tripped on the curb. Daniel's hand lifted instinctively, not catching her, just leaving space ready if she needed it. Lily steadied herself and burst into laughter, the sound of someone finding her own balance, if only for a moment. They crossed a patch of pavement scarred with tar, next to a thin run of water where something white floated, maybe a tissue dropped from the ceremony. Janet bent, picked it up, tucked it into her bag. A small act of clearing the way. Daniel noticed, tucked it deep inside himself with the spoon and the cup, the blue crayon stub, and the towel always waiting on the table. When their porch came into view at the bottom of the hill, the wind chime's shadow lay against the wall like an old pattern. Daniel stepped ahead, opened the gate so it wouldn't squeal too loud. They entered the yard. The light thinned, the porch bulb nearly ready to take over. Lily placed her leaf on the sill beside a stone and a chestnut shell, her collection from the road. She crouched, arranged them, leaf in the middle, stone on the left, shell on the right, a flag of balance, not color. Before they went in, Janet touched Daniel's arm. If ever I go quiet again, remind me, she said softly, like handing someone a key to hold. Daniel nodded. He pressed one hand to the doorframe, the other to his chest pocket where Lily's scribbled note still sat in the notebook. Both hands touching two different pasts, wood of the present, paper of what had been. Each warm in its own way. Inside, the scent of new wood from the porch mixed with the old soap smell, like someone wearing a fresh shirt but still the same person. Daniel stepped through last, letting Janet and Lily go ahead. He glanced back at the hill a moment. The road wasn't steeper now, nor easier. But somewhere on it, there was finally a place to stop and say the hard words. A hand on his shoulder could be enough. The door closed. In the living room, the yellow lamp gathered the three of them into one warm circle. Lily stretched up on her toes, set the certificate on the low shelf beneath the photo with the new frame. She straightened it, stepped back, tilted her head, and let out the tiniest laugh, enough for the room to hear. Janet hung her bag on the chair, pulled a tissue from her pocket, folded it again without using it. Daniel switched off the camcorder, laid it flat on the table. Outside, wind passed the new porch board without a scream. Inside, three breaths found each other, light, steady. No one spoke, but the apology from the walk home had already found its place, lying quiet as a stone that smooths the water longer than any gust of air. Night fell early, as if the sun itself wanted to leave town before its usual hour. Darkness hadn't fully settled when the porch light clicked on, casting a soft yellow circle over the wooden boards. It didn't blaze, didn't blind, just enough to mark where the porch ended and the yard with its trees began. The urn that once sat at the foot of the chair wasn't there anymore. Daniel had moved it inside, tucked away from view, away from the beat of his chest. The space beneath the chair now showed clean floorboards, empty, but lighter. He settled into the old seat, leaning back against the post, listening to the frame of the house hum gently as the wind brushed through. Crickets sang in the yard, not all at once but in turns, stringing together a tune no one had written. From farther off came the bark of a dog, carried with the faint metal clink of a neighbor's wind chime. Daniel didn't move. Didn't need to. His hands rested on his thighs, his shoulders loose. All he did was listen. Inside, a bedroom door stood open a crack. The soft orange glow of a nightlight spilled across the hallway floor. Lily was asleep. From the porch he couldn't see her face, but he could picture it, hair messy across her forehead, the old stuffed bear pressed to her arm, her breath steady. That calm, that rhythm, it was the only answer needed for all the months behind them. Daniel looked up at the porch light. A moth smacked against the glass and bounced away, leaving a faint tremor in the glow. He realized then the light wasn't only to show the way home, it was to tell those inside that someone was awake, someone was keeping watch. A small thing, ordinary, but patient. This house was lived in, this house was waiting. His mind drifted over the long road behind him, the cold telegram, the fallen spoon, the torn drawing, the trembling voice of his daughter at the microphone. All of it pressed together into one silent question that the light, the crickets, and the night wind seemed to whisper, "Who will you stay for, to the end?" Daniel didn't rush to answer. He just sat, letting the glow fold around him, letting the question rest in his chest like a flat stone, warming slowly under his palm. Inside, Lily breathed steady. On the porch, the light held. And the night, because of it, felt less dark. Maybe, after everything, what stays isn't the files stacked on a table or the heavy words stamped on paper. What stays is the porch light switched on a little early, the leaf Lily brought home and set on the windowsill, the sound of crickets stitching together a quiet song in the night. A soldier, after war and loss, finally learning how to sit, breathe steady, and stay not as a guard, but as a shelter. Life rarely gives us neat answers. But sometimes a porch light, a hand on the shoulder, or a child's laugh chasing a dry leaf is enough to remind us, we're still here and we're staying. And if you've listened this far, maybe you've had someone in your life who never left. Or maybe you were the one who stayed for somebody else. If that memory stirs in you, I'd like to invite you to leave a comment, write their name, or even just a single dot. Not to complete this story, but so that someone lost, scrolling through, might see it and remember, there are people who choose to stay. Right to the end.